Hey, today I'm going to be covering Novu. Novu is open source notification infrastructure for developers. So what on earth does that mean? It basically means you can quickly add notifications to your app. So over here you can see a notification bar. I can do click, send a test notification, and I should see another notification pop up here. And here the notification has appeared, and now I can click it as read. If you're new here, my name is Ellie. This channel is called Learn from Open Source. Every week I go through a new project and dive into the code behind it. Today we're going to go through Novu. First I'm going to explore what the app actually is, and then I'm going to dive into the GitHub code. I'm also building an open source app myself. It's called Inbox Zero, and I'd love it if you give it a star on GitHub. It helps you manage your email better with AI assistance. Why would you want to use Novu instead of just building it yourself? Why not just send the email notifications to your users or store the notifications in the database? And the answer is that notifications can get quite complex. Imagine you're building your own social media app. You're building Twitter and you want to notify people every time they get a message. But now there's a user that's popular and getting a message every few minutes. Do you really want to bombard them with emails every few minutes? Or instead what you could do is wait half an hour, collect all 100 messages that they got in that half an hour, and then send them an email, hey, you just got 100 new messages. And it's not just that. Notifications appear in lots of different places. They appear in app within the web UI, but it could also be a push notification for a mobile app. And it could also be an email that someone is getting, or an SMS, Discord, Slack message, and so on. There are lots of different places these messages can appear, and there are lots of different flows and timings you might want set up for all of this. So that's what Novu comes to solve, and Novu is an open source solution for this. So to use Novu, you'd use their API, one of their packages. Here you can see an example using Novu Node package, and all you have to do is trigger a notification, say what the workflow ID is, so you can have lots of different workflows and different types of notifications, and also the subscriber ID for who you want to send this message to. And then you can send a payload such as hello world is the message that this user received. And once you've done that, you can display the notification in the UI. So they provide React packages to show this notification UI. They also provide packages for Vue and Angular. And you don't need to use their packages. The UI, you can build them yourself, but this makes it even simpler to drop in notifications immediately into your app. There are lots of different providers you can connect to. So for example, if you're sending email, you could use SendGrid, Mailgun, SES, Postmark, Resend, and so on. You could send messages over SMS via Twilio, and you can also send push notifications, for example, Expo for React Native app, and you can send messages on Slack and Discord and so on. This is what their hosted cloud offering looks like. You can also self-host this yourself as Novu is open source, but let's set up a new workflow, which is a mention in a comment. This is a template, but we can set this up however we want. So how this starts is, firstly, we call the trigger. So that's the first step. And then this user gets an in-app notification, and this happens immediately. Here you can see commenter name has mentioned you in comment snippet. So these are variables that pass in the payload when you call the trigger. And then the next step is a digest. And what a digest is it collects a whole bunch of notifications together and then uses them in the next step. So over here, we have a digest after 30 minutes. So this will wait 30 minutes to get all the notifications that we've received so far. This might be 10 notifications. And then after that, it will send an email. And here you can see the email content and what is being sent. So if there's only one email being sent, it will just say the user mentioned you in a comment. But if there are lots of notifications, it will say, hey, you just got 10 comments. And if we want, we can add even more steps over here. So we could send a push notification, we could send a Telegram message, and so on. You'll be able to see a list of your subscribers in the sidebar here. And another interesting part is the integration store. And here you will see the different providers that you can connect to the app. So in app, you could use Novu. For email, you can use Postmark and a whole bunch of others. For chat, you can use Slack and Discord and everything I showed you before. This is how you would do it from the app itself. There's more in the sidebar you can look into. For example, this is an activity feed. Over here, you can find translations that each message could be translated into lots of different languages. And then if you want to see it again, jumping back to what we had before, this is their React UI component. Here's send a test notification that calls their API. And here you see what it would look like in practice. But this is just one place you might receive notifications. So that's a bit about how Novu works. Now I'm going to dive into the code behind it and how it was built. So it uses Nest.js. That's a Node.js framework. It's sort of like Angular, but on the back end, it adds good structure. It uses decorators quite a lot, worth playing around with. It really adds a lot of structure to your app. Here you can see the databases MongoDB and Redis. So that's really what's powering this entire piece of infrastructure. Novu has some really big clients. It's working at quite a large scale. It's sending hundreds of millions of events per month, maybe billions of events. I don't know the exact number, but yeah, this isn't a small app. This is built for scalability, and they're using Kubernetes and AWS auto scaling for the management. It's able to scale horizontally. I've spoken to the CTO about it. They've done a lot of work to optimize things to make it as good as possible. And in terms of monitoring and observability, they're using Prometheus and Grafana for that. A core piece of the backend is BullMQ, which is used as the message broker. To give you a bit of an idea of how BullMQ works, it's a queue where you add tasks to it, and then there's a worker that listens to jobs. So if you want to set that up yourself and use it in your own project, BullMQ, you do something like this. You'd install the BullMQ package, you'd set up a new queue, and then you'd add lots of different jobs to it. And the reason you might do this is because you have long-running tasks. So for example, let's say you're doing image compression and it takes a minute to compress every image. You don't want your API to take a minute to respond. So what would happen is someone calls your API to compress an image. It returns okay immediately, yes, this is happening, but in the background it's added the job to a queue and another worker is going and doing the image compression. And this is a great way to scale your app and tasks, and it helps with performance a lot. Here you can see a worker that is being set up. It's basically just listening for events. You could have 100 different workers working in parallel, and they're all managing different items in the queue, and once they finish their task, they'll tell the queue, hey, we're done, and this item can be removed or marked as done in the queue. So that's some really simple code, and Redis itself is fairly simple to use, but this piece of code and the Redis database is powering a huge part of Novu behind the scenes, and it is making a lot of the magic happen. When you call the Novu API to trigger a notification, it's basically adding a notification to the BullMQ queue, and then at a certain point it's going to push the notification to someone, or when the time comes it's going to send a digest email to the users that it needs to send the email to. Diving deeper into the code now, I'm going to take a look at the GitHub repo. So it's got 32,000 stars. It's quite a popular repo, and I'm going to open the editor in my browser to take a look through the code. If you'd like to contribute to the Novu project, there's a handbook to get started. Here you can see the guide for getting started and setting it up locally. The project is a PNPM workspace. Here you can see the different packages and the apps that I used, and it uses NX to manage this. If we dive into the different packages, you'll see there's a CLI for Novu. Here's a notification center for React components. Here's an Angular package and a Vue package. So all these packages are managed from this same repo, and they can all be published from here. So let's take a look at how triggering happens behind the scenes. This is a core piece of the app, so it will give us a really good idea of how it works end to end and understand the code base. So I've opened up this folder over here. It's in apps, API, source, and then app. And within this, we will find the events folder. Now, this is a Nest.js module. If you're familiar with Nest, then this structure will look pretty familiar to you. They've slightly adapted it for the Novu project, but you have a lot of the common pieces. So we have a module over here. We have a controller, which is always part of Nest.js projects, and we'll have services in other places. And then DTOs are over here. DTOs are data transfer objects, which we'll dive into in a second as well. So here you can see an endpoint for /trigger. It's a post endpoint. Now you'll notice decorators. You might not be familiar with them in JavaScript. Nest.js uses them heavily, and you'll see these all over the project. If you want to learn Nest.js, by the way, or really dive deep into Novu, that would be a good way to start. I'd just open up your own standard Nest.js project, and pretty quickly you'll learn about the structure and how it works. But over here, you can see lots of different decorators. Here you can see a user auth guard. This basically means we need to be authenticated to call this endpoint. It's /trigger. This is the response type. So this is the DTO that I mentioned before. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Response DTO. So here you can see the different properties in the response. It's got an acknowledged, a status field, and so on. And here you'll see a description, and this is probably used for things like documentation. And you can see the function itself is track event, and when this function is called, it will call this execute function. And this as well you'll find throughout the app. If I search for the word like .execute, I'll find it 175 times, execute itself 300 times across the project. And basically every single module will have a use cases folder, and that module, so the events module, is split up into lots of different use cases. So for example, if you want to process bulk triggers, that is in this folder, and here's the command and here's the use case for it. If you want to cancel something, so that will be in here, and so on. I'm going to take a look at pass event request. You'll notice that it has been injected into this class. So you'll see this whatever it is .execute. So where does that come from? And it's been injected into the class over here. This is exactly how Nest.js projects are structured. You'll see it all over the place, and I believe it's very similar in Angular. For example, if we wanted to see pass event request, this is the object that's being created. Let's try and jump to it. It's in use cases pass event request. So I'm just going to scroll into that pass event request. Here you'll see the different parts to it. In the index.ts, you'll see some tests, a command. The command is basically just an object that is being passed in, but the main code and the logic is in usecase.ts. Within this file, again, you'll see all sorts of things being injected into this class using dependency injection. And once again, we see an execute function, and here's the command. And that's basically the data that's being passed in. If I scroll down, this class is doing all sorts of validation, make sure there's workflow steps, that there's active workflow steps, and so on. But eventually, assuming it's all validated, we get to a point where we actually handle the request. And you'll notice over here that we get the job data and we add it to a workflow queue service. So let's take a look at workflow queue service. I'm going to go to the file. You'll notice it doesn't do a lot. All it does is add something to the queue, or if we get an array of jobs, it will bulk add them to the queue. This is what we saw before, by the way. It's just implementing BullMQ. So it's very simple. But if we want to learn more about it, we need to go to Codebase service. So let's take a look at this file. And here you'll see that the BullMQ service is being injected. And this is where we create a queue. This is where we add a queue. Let's find add. You can see the queue's being added, but all we're doing is adding it to the instance, which is a BullMQ instance, which you'll see over here. So one last time, let's take a look at BullMQ service that's being created over here. And you should see at the top, we're importing BullMQ into this file, and we're setting up a worker, a queue, and all sorts of other things. And if I take a look at add, you'll see I'm doing this.queue.add. I'm just sending it to BullMQ. And the same with add bulk. So once we have submitted events to the queue, well, on the other side, we're going to have to run a worker to go and process those events. So if I take a look in the BullMQ documentation again, you'll see the first side is create the queue named foo, and then add these different events with the data. And then on the other side, I have a new worker called foo, and then every time it gets a function, and every time it processes a job. So here you can see the data is foo bar, which is passed over here, and then I have Baz as well, which is sent straight after. So where is that happening in the app over here? Here we can see a standard worker, and it gets injected with two classes that are important to us right now. So run job is one of them, which I'll take a look at. And the other one is going to appear in standard worker service. So we'll take a look here, and this will inherit from worker base service, which I'm going to jump into. We saw this before. And over here, you can see we are creating a worker, and this is creating a BullMQ worker basically. And what we need to pass it is this function, the topic name, and the processor, which is a function. So you can see here, create worker, and this is being passed init worker. Init worker gets that processor function that we care about. So if I jump back to standard worker, you'll see that I have this.init worker. And over here, get worker processor is where I'm returning the function. So I'll jump to this definition, and you'll see over here that it's calling run job.execute, and it's passing in the job or the data that we've received. Now, run job, we'll go to its definition. Here we'll see it's the run job class. So let's take a look at that. And you'll see that we are calling execute, which we've seen a few times across the app. And if I jump to the end, you'll see that I'm calling send message.execute. And what this is going to do is call the send message class, and it's going to go and send the different messages. So it could be over SMS or email or whatever it is. We can jump to send message use case. Here you'll see the different types of message I can send. Here we have send message email. So let's see where this is called. And over here you can see we are executing this send email command. So we're going to jump to this class, which is send message email. Once again, we get to execute as the function that we're calling. But the important part for this is send message. So we have this function over here. This creates a mail factory. It gets the handler. And what this is doing is basically getting the provider that we care about. So in mail factory, you'll see I have send grid handler, mail gun handler. And if I jump into this, we'll find the handler over here. And this will take us to the provider, which is part of Novu Mailgun. I'm going to jump to Mailgun provider. And you can see all it does is call the API to actually send an email via Mailgun. And you'll see over here that there are lots of other providers as well. If I quickly minimize this, you'll see there's MailerSend and, you know, all the other names we mentioned, Expo, push notifications, Discord, and so on. And these files are pretty small. There's only like 80 lines of code here. It basically just calls the API, sends over the data it needs, and that will send the email. Now, there's obviously way more behind all of this. MongoDB is also used to manage some of the jobs. There's tons of code in this project, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of the overall flow of how it works behind the scenes. So to recap some of that, when we're calling post events trigger, this could be called via your UI using the React component that they provide, or it could be called via the API directly. You pass in all this different information, which creates a DTO object in the code base. This will push that event to the queue. On the other side of that, there'll be a worker which will go and manage this event that was pushed. It will grab all the relevant information that it needs. So if it's sending a message to SMS or email or whatever it is, and then it will take care of actually sending out the email, and obviously handle a whole bunch of other logic that's involved there, but we haven't dived into the nitty-gritty. I hope that gave you a good idea of the app. There's obviously a lot more to check out here. I didn't want to go on for too long. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and also give Inbox Zero a like on GitHub. Inbox Zero is an email app that I'm building. It's fully open source, has 1,500 GitHub stars so far, but I'm looking to keep growing it. 2,000 stars is the next milestone. So if you enjoyed the content, it means a lot to me if you can go and star it. We also have a Discord, both for Inbox Zero and for Learn from Open Source. So feel free to join, and happy to chat and answer any questions there.